Thank you for being here with us. Thank you, Fred. You've met Stacey. You know a little bit about Stacey. I'll tell you a little bit about Fred, and then Fred and Stacey will tell you a little bit about themselves. Fred and I have known each other for a long time. The first time we met, I booked Fred for a festival that I was organizing in Townsville about, I don't know, maybe almost 15 years ago, maybe 20, I don't know. Fred was, maybe still is, one half of Impossible Odds back then. That's how we met, remember?
Yeah, that's right.
Fred is the program manager for the Wanagu Awara language preservation program at Monash University. He's a community leader. He's a bachelor and Garawa man. And as well, he has some South Sea Islander and Tongan in him as well. He has held many positions throughout the time. When the colonizers send their prince along to Australia, Fred is the one who walks them around country sometimes. Isn't that right? You walk around colonizer princes around country. He's been actively involved in youth development projects, empowering Indigenous youth, preserving language, advocating for more just policy with regards to Indigenous First Nations Australians' rights, and someone that I deeply look up to and I cherish my friendship with. So maybe give both Stacey and Fred a round of applause now, again. Stacey, do you want to tell, since we've got the welcome to country out of the way now, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your story, and what you do now, and then so the audience gets to know about where you're speaking from?
Absolutely, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, yeah. So that's pretty deadly intro for you, Leo. It's pretty amazing the work you're doing, and as in that theme, I guess for me, it's a similar case. You know, we wear lots of hats as community members, and sometimes it's like, oh, we do all these great things, but really we're actually pulled in many directions a lot of the time, and given we're a very small percentage of the population, it's a big load to carry, but also, a lot of our mobs aren't in the position to do that as yet. Even me, I'm only now really finding my voice. I've been really shy, and I've been battling trauma for a lot of my life. As I introduced you in the Welcome to Country, representing my elders and my mob here, I could stand there all day telling you stories. And I did do F1's systems thinking for social change leadership. Got it. Last year during lockdown, I signed up. I'd noticed one of my sister girls who's watching now, Alara, shout out. She was doing it with her mum, Annie Sue Briggs. And so I, jumped in and did it. And what I learned was how not to polarise people, because I think what I realised that I did a lot was obviously just lots of trauma. And even in my area of work, I'm a First Nations curator out at Melbourne Museum, so I work with the ancestor collections and ancestral remains, and for me, I'm quite used to that. I've probably become quite desensitised to it, but even growing up as a kid, I've seen lots of old people, and I've been in those spaces a lot. So I think what I've got to think about how I talk about it and not polarise people. So for me, that's my space there. And then Vic NAIDOC chair, so this will be my 5th year, and for the last 2 years we pivoted online, and that was really hard because I felt like a news reporter filming myself from home on the Zoom. And it's really bizarre. It's a strange position to be, trying to get a message across, but also trying to put on a brave face while you're at home in isolation. But we did it. We did 2 years of online. Victoria NAIDOC was one of the only ones to deliver, a huge program of Vic NAIDOC events online and brought community together. And then my other role as a jitty dancer and cultural educator, I did touch on the fact that we're not just a dance group singing around country. We have a ceremony each year where it's our responsibility to instill values into the younger generation through that ceremony, and we do it up on Corandurk. So Corandurk was the mission that I mentioned to you, which is still up there, but it's in the control of us Wurundjeri mob now. So we've been doing that ceremony. And my next steps are I'm moving into, so my exhibition's just finished, a major exhibition, and it was on home country, Willembeek. So it was a story of the southeast Australian region, and I've got some images that I can show soon just to touch on the more polarising topics. So it's, important. Con really inspired me to use my voice, stronger. And we are in a space here where it's okay if I tell you some of the, heavy stuff. We need to step outside of that comfort zone. I do too. I need to step out of that and, be a stronger advocate for my mob and for country. But also, I'm moving into a Masters of Social Change Leadership at the University of Melbourne. So I've been awarded a scholarship, which I feel very grateful and privileged for. But again, the people that have walked before me, my mum, my nan, my aunties, uncles, who've all paved the way for those opportunities for me. So I grab them with both hands. So watch this space.
Thank you, Stacey. Can we get a little bit more volume on Stacey's mic as well? Just a bit more volume on Stacey's mic. Fred, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself, your story, your background?
Yeah. Jack of all trades, master of none. I grew up in Brisbane. I'm one of the Bachelor songmen, one of the 3 Bachelor songmen, and my auntie and one of my cousins and another lady, they're the Bachelor song women. And it's a whole songs from my family on that side of my family. And then I'm an initiated Garawa man up in the Gulf of Carpentaria. So Bachelor country is Gari. If you've ever been to Harvey Bay, Gari, Fraser Island, they just renamed it back to our lingo, our language, Bachelor language. So it was renamed, given that name back, which is just a small thing that could happen. So, it's slow and steady wins the race. And then Garawa, up in the Gulf of Carpentaria on my grandfather's side, just east of Borroloola, running down into what the new borders now into Queensland. And there's Garawa people. And then my dad's Tongan, and on the Bachelor side, my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, they married into the Bachelor side. They were from Gela, brought over as sugarcane slaves, indentured labour from Gela Island and Tanna in Vanuatu. And I, as a Garawa man, I'm learning Gujiga from my grandfather's side. So for our clan, the Gujiga is a full songline, 280 verses of Gujiga. And that's just for our clan, for one section of country that runs over a few hundred kilometres. And then, as well as that, been working with youth. I worked with at-risk youth from when I was at-risk youth, actually. Just after I left high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I sort of just slid through the education system and got through to grade 12. And I thought, if I can stay in here and get through to grade 12, it'll help me to get somewhere in the future. Now I sit in an office and there's all professors, and then little old black me, just right here sitting in the middle. So it's been interesting in that journey to see how to find myself and my voice, but also finding other like-minded people, First Nations people and non-Indigenous people, to help empower each other. And really, 10, 15, 20 years ago, I would have no hope for the future of this country or where it's heading. But 2021, it feels like there's changes are coming slowly, where the borders are sort of coming down in terms of them and us sort of thing. And so slowly but surely, yeah. But there are still a lot of borders and a lot of things in place that we will probably talk about in a minute. But there's hope. I feel like there's hope for the future in terms of a social justice mindset and the new generation that's coming through, a new kind, a new way of thinking. Really excited about that.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you. Why does my mic sound so nice and loud and deep, and it's still a bit not quite there? Maybe just up them a little bit. Thank you. Well, we're talking about centering First Nation sovereignty, and I guess one of the questions I wanted to start off with is, over the decades, the language has changed. We originally started with native title, anti-discrimination, and then now we're kind of moving into anti-racism and decolonization. So I wanted to ask the two of you, when we use the word decolonization, sometimes people use that quite loosely, and it's like, oh yeah, we're doing this thing to decolonize, we're doing this thing, but what does it actually mean to you? When you hear that word, what would that actually look like and feel like in reality?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've been reflecting on that myself a lot, and it depends where I am, I guess. If I'm in the gallery up on the mountain, I'm not decolonising that space, but I'm indigenising it because it's, obviously a colonial space. Then I think about, decolonising institutions, say, like working toward that within Melbourne Museum, having the collections and ancestor tools and adornments, I refer to them, and that's another part of just everything, everyday language. For me, I'm constantly decolonising because I need to decolonise myself as well. Even though, my grandmother born on Corranderk Mission, she was colonised. My great-grandmother was colonised through having her life changed. She couldn't speak her language or practice ceremony. And she did it in secret. But that was sort of, that's our story. I reflect on that and how that impacted even my grandmother and my mother. So my mother was she lived majority of her life quite uncomfortable just in the world, and growing up seeing that as an older woman now and a mother, now I look back and think, gosh, I wish I could say this to her and say that to her. She couldn't, it wasn't the society we're living in now. She didn't have those support mechanisms. Women were, it was very different. So I think about all of that and how, I can contribute to decolonising through jitty, normalising ceremony. After I go to an event, the younger ones still wash their ochre off. I'm like, you should keep it on. I go shopping with it on to the supermarket, do a bit of food shopping, and people ask questions, or, some people look at me strange, but I stand strong in that, normalising it, because that's our culture. That's country. And then my daughter, the next generation, leading by example, and I'm still working it out, but to me, that's decolonisation in action. I'm taking responsibility for it in my own way, and as a collective with my mob, and then in spaces like this with like-minded people. And then regeneration is one that keeps sort of floating alongside decolonisation. So while we're doing that, I'm thinking of ways to regenerate country and reinstate our language and culture.
Thank you, Stacey. I might throw that same question to you, Fred.
Yeah, I'd agree with that totally, and particularly that regenerating our language and culture. One thing I think about when I think about decolonising is not so much the emphasis of asking us what you guys should do, but you guys talking to each other and talking to your politicians. We're 2.5% of the population. Hold your own mob accountable to be able to whip them into line in terms of what's right and what's wrong. And, it's not, and it comes down to legislation. It comes down to so many things that are out of our control as Indigenous people. But I feel like if there is the option where in a conversation that might not be very comfortable over dinner with a person in your family or a friend, or in the business structure, in terms of, I loved what Con was talking about. It was amazing what they're doing within their organisation. Having those difficult conversations and making those changes. Actions speak louder than words, and I don't want to be having to try to talk to people about it in 20, 30 years. I was sitting in a meeting in Brisbane last year about black deaths in custody, and I lost a nephew to black death in custody. I lost a cousin up on Palm Island, there, Murunyi there now, Dumaji. And when that happened, you know, we're reliving this sort of trauma. And I think, yeah, in reliving that trauma, we're having to deal with the trauma rather than moving forward and taking that power and empowering ourselves through things that other people, non-Indigenous people, can take for granted, like education, like an education system that values your culture and values your language. I think, yeah, decolonising is a mirror, and Australia needs to look into that mirror really hard and ask itself, what are they doing? You know, in terms of just one thing I think about often is the Nazi Party and what they did in all around the world in terms of, you know, massacring Jewish people, and then what that country and the world and those countries that were involved in that genocide, where they're at today, and the conversations, the difficult conversations they've had to have with themselves to be able to move forward, to be able to build a future where everybody is included and it's an inclusive, open, respectful relationship. And that conversation's never happened in Australia. The genocide has never stopped happening. It happens in legislation now, it happens in the prison system, it happens, you know, I'm 12 years old, go back to 1990s, I'm 12 years old playing Tiggy with my cousin, and a police officer saying, "Hey, get here, you stole that car around the corner." And me just running inside going, "Oh, Mum," with a pair of stubbies on and a singlet, you know, running inside to Mum, and then Mum having to come out and advocate for me and to tell this police officer, "They're playing Tiggy, mate, on the street." That wouldn't happen if I was white, you know, but it happened to me. So I think, yeah, I'll cut it there. Otherwise I'll be going on all day.
Thank you.
But,
Thank you. No, you raised a good point that I was going to touch on, so it's a great segue. That we all got that, you know, racist uncle or neighbour who might throw that statement of like, it happened so long ago, why don't you just get over it? We can't undo something that happened, you know, 200 years ago. Colonization's happened and we can't undo it, so just get over it. But you mentioned that it hasn't ended. Colonization is not something that happens and stops happening. It's like it's a continuous thing. It never stopped happening. Whether we look at the arrival of those first few fleets and everything that's happened since then, from the genocide that you touched on and the stolen children and those generations, that never really ended, as you touched on. The stolen Indigenous Australian kids, for example, are still 10 times more likely to be removed from their families than white Australian kids. So for us to pretend like we've given an apology for that and that's all in the past now is actually quite absurd. It's an ongoing process. Indigenous youth are still 17 times more likely, 17 times more likely, 1,700% more likely to end up in youth detention centres. So we can't for a split second imagine that this has ended at some point and that was in the past and now we're in the future and now we're not racist and everything's fine. So how do we actually undo it when it's still been ongoing for 200 odd years? To you, what does that look like? Where do we start? Because obviously what you mentioned earlier was like indigenizing spaces and reasserting culture and claiming that power back to preserve language and preserve culture. But then there's so much more to do as well. Like literally, like you've got a bunch of people, us, running around pretending like we run the place, whereas it's your country and we still haven't come to terms with that. Like we've got people here who pretend like it's their country, and it's not. So like that's what we really need to get to. It's a little bit pointed, but it's the truth, right? We've got to actually have that really difficult conversation. So for you, it's a long kind of question to ask, but where do we begin actually undoing what's been ongoing for 200 odd years now?
I'll start. Well, yeah, okay. I think reflecting back on what you started saying in opening, and that's why I really love this space and the values you stand for, and that's the fact that country, for us, community and country, or kin and country, are not separate. It's all interlinked. And so for me personally, my next goal is to work more with kids in care, you know. So we speak at events, we share our culture at events, at schools, and we're sharing our language with schools, and that's all nice and everything, but I'm starting to really feel a little bit like, hang on, who are we teaching this to? You know, you guys can catch up later, but I need to be with the kids in care, because I, for example, did a jury workshop last year with a bunch of kids, and there were 2 kids in out-of-home care, and I didn't even know, the organisation didn't alert me of that. But that was, I knew because I could tell, but you know, I didn't know prior to getting there. So I didn't know their background or anything, but I could tell, and they were just drawn to, they were hanging off every word that I said. And I got so much out of that because, you know, some kids just a little bit unsure of it. As I said, we're normalising it with a lot of the younger generation. But yeah, so the foster mother afterwards came, or foster carer came up afterwards after I'd spent an hour with them, and she just broke down. She cried her eyes out and said, I've had these 2 girls for 8 years. I think one was maybe 10, so she said she was 2, and one was 9, so there was a small gap. They were little to me. And there was a 16-year-old boy as well, so she must have, you know, taken them siblings into care 8 years ago, and she said this is the first culture they've ever experienced. So to me that was alarming. What the, and the carer's crying, and she's, what a good carer, you know, for her to, but she said she'd been trying and trying and trying for a long time. And so then I walked away talking to Mandy, our lead jury. I can't do public events anymore. I've got to work with these kids. I've got to see them at least once a month, at least, you know, and because I haven't seen them for 12 months, these 2 kids. So things take time, and there's systems you've got to bulldoze. But my thing is, well, I think outside the square. I don't follow the rules. I just, you know, we push through this way, we push through that way. What about this elder? They know this person, and you've just got to get your way through. You don't give up like that. So I'm getting to these kids, and that's, you know, a start, and it's all linked. It's taking them out on country. I'm not their elder. They're probably from another part of country, but then I need to bring the people in that need to help them with that. But I'm not going to let that stop me from accessing them as a Wurundjeri woman. They're living on Wurundjeri country, so it's my job to make sure they're okay. That's how I see it. So.
Thank you, Stacey. I'm going to throw it to, you wanted to answer the same question, but I also know you've got notes that you've written up, so I want to throw to them as well. So I'll go to that after if you want.
Yeah, to touch on what Sister was just talking about here now, it's so important, like, and that gets overlooked, and I suppose that's a part of an assimilation policy that's never really left, you know. It's been legislated out, but it's still there. And in a similar story up in Brisbane, we had a community meeting about Indigenous youth suicide and how alarming it was, and all the community members there and families. And the theme that popped up, and what I suppose I noticed in what you were talking about, Kaz, is what's happened to a lot of communities around the country is we have been so caught up in just getting basic human rights and being acknowledged as the powerful people that we are of this land, that in the process, somewhere along the way, because of how things are in terms of having to hold down a 9-to-5, study, all this stuff, have to be assimilated, but also walk in 2 worlds where we have our culture and we have this whole other system that we're trying to bend and flow with. We've, like I noticed in that action, it's almost like somewhere along the line, there's so much fighting for our rights happening that I feel like the system's set up like this, that we forget how much knowledge we need to pass on, how much we have in us, and the stories from our elders and our old people and our parents that we're not passing on because we're so busy surviving, we're so busy trying to give them something that will help them to fit into this system. And so we have to, so we get caught up in the whole rigmarole of 9-to-5 life and forget about our role as Indigenous people to be able to pass on those stories. And then in saying that, to come back to what you were talking about with a foster parent coming up and talking to you. So we had this meeting in Brisbane, up in Meanjin, and all the communities there, mobs there, and been going to meetings most of my life. And they're saying, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? And this theme kept popping up: funding. We need to get 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 funding. And I said, how about all the song women and songmen in the room and out in the community all get together and we just run a thing every week for free down here in Musgrave Park, and we just do that. Oh yeah, but it's our time. We need funding. We need funding. We need funding. So after the meeting finished, I thought, what helped me when I was young is I remember going to that same park, to that same Jagger Arts Hall, and going to my parents going to bingo. My parents they're putting on a little disco for us. They're putting on shake a leg there. So all these little activities that were happening, they cost us nothing, we'd just go. And I thought about it, coming back to what I was just talking about in terms of us forgetting about our generations are so caught up in the fight and the struggle that we've forgotten about passing on what we have. So I said, okay, I kept bringing it up. We can just do this. We don't need funding. So the following week I did a gig, and the week after I got, $1,500 or whatever. So I put $1,100 into just food, buying all these years ago, in the early 2000s, they had that Indigenous games training that went all around the country, so I did that. So it's like, I got all the bits and pieces and got all the little exercise equipment and stuff that you need to do that. Some bits of wood to make clapsticks, stuff for the boys to make spears, bits of bark that the aunties can teach the girls how to make coolamons, and weaving and all this sort of stuff. Got it all together and then just started running it. And in a similar fashion, but it wasn't a foster care as such, it was Department of Youth Justice, Child Safety, all these people. The first week it happened, there's about 150 kids there with their families. Wow, this is amazing. Oh, excuse me, sir, how much, kids coming up, how much is that food there? Free. Oh, wow. And the parents saying, who funded this? No one funded it. She funded it, he funded it, we funded it. We just all threw in, just community. Running this program. Second week, third week, by about the fourth or fifth week, then, docs is showing up, Department of Communities, Indigenous health programs and stuff, saying, oh, this is amazing. Who funds this? Nobody, just the community. Oh, well, how can we get involved? Can we bring down tents? Can we pitch in? Can we do it? I said, no, this is for the community, by the community. And you guys get, can we bring down our clients? And I said, if that's what your workers want to do, but do you have cultural workers? Yeah, well, why aren't they teaching them culture in the homes where they're living? Why are these children having to come to a free program when you're getting millions upon millions of dollars around the whole country to deliver what we can do in the community for free? And then, but in the same token, it's not as simple as that. It takes a bit of goodwill, but also just knowing where to access that information, I suppose. But yeah, just to touch on that.
Thank
That's
you.
what
You raised it. You both kind of like are stitching together a point that I want to highlight and then kind of maybe elaborate on. And then there's 2 points actually that you both mentioned the idea of obviously that the preservation of culture that was intentionally suppressed and demonized for so long, where Indigenous Australians weren't allowed to speak their own language, practice their culture for so long. So you're now left with this task of trying to preserve what languages we still have left and what cultures still are to preserve, whilst also having to, as you said, assimilate into a system that is built on colonization, genocide, and white supremacy in order to be seen and deemed as successful. Whether you just want to pay your rent or be respected within society as a mouthpiece for, colored folk, you've got to like make it in these systems that disadvantage you at every single step. So you've got to assimilate and progress in a system that's not designed for you. In fact, it's designed to oppress you and left with the task of preserving that. So it's like you mentioned walking within two different worlds. And that then connects with the next point, which was the funding, right? And we're having a quick conversation outside about something, and I wanted to like make sure we don't miss that point, because it's it does come down to money sometimes. And I think that the point that you'd written in your notes was something that I'd like to throw to, because that, for me, it highlights that the initial response that a lot of people have to something like that, the royalties thing, highlights that there is still embedded racism within how we think about some of these things. So I'll throw back to you to highlight that, and then we can go back to Stacey and hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think there needs to be legislation change. So to allow Indigenous communities to receive our fair share of remuneration for desecration of sites. At the moment, with native title, it's so tokenistic. We can't stop a government from coming in and extracting, and companies from coming in and extracting minerals and things from the land. And just personally, I hate mining. Like, I don't like it. I never have. I never will. But imagine if there was a system in place where Indigenous people are getting their fair share of those royalties that are already, I had a non-Indigenous mate of mine years ago say, but bro, he said, look, it's blood money. Why would you want to take blood money? He said, hey, it's my blood. It's my grandfather's blood, our family's blood. And that money and that extraction on that land is happening now, and it'll always happen until people realise just how much it's hurting the earth. And I said, and if we can imagine if we got our fair share of that, so I said, our communities wouldn't be in the dire straits that they're in. But government doesn't want that, They want to put us have it always in a deficit. Since 1788 to now, we've always been seen as being in the deficit. We're always having to be taught, or never been given our sovereign right as Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people to be able to hold our power on our own country. And so things like the jitty dances and what all our mobs are doing in micro versions around the country, they're all little spot fires. And if they can be acknowledged for the blaze that they could be, it could become something powerful. And, I think for me personally, the goal is get rid of mining altogether. But,
We wouldn't have microphones to
it's
speak
like,
into.
it's like running up a hill with 100-pound weights on your back, looking at it.
No, but you do raise a good point. Like, if mining is going to happen, and it has been since colonization and well before, that's what most of the wealth of this nation and many Western colonized nations has been built on, right? Whether we're talking about mining today or whether it was cutting down trees and grazing animals on land where they weren't meant to be grazing, wealth has been accumulated through our interaction with environment from the Western perspective, from that cultural perspective, and not in many other cultural perspectives, but the Western world saw the accumulation of wealth through engagement with natural environment as perfectly fine. And that's still happening to this day. So you mentioned your friend who had that little thing of but Indigenous Australians or First Nations peoples can't profit from mining. You've got to be 100% against it. But why do we not think that it's incorrect for non-Indigenous Australians to profit from it? So that idea that non-Indigenous Australians can profit and benefit from mining, logging, whatever it happens to be, but then as soon as we're actually, if you're going to desecrate the land, you should actually be paying a significant proportion of those profits, not just hiring a few, but the funds should actually go back to you. So that little missing link for a lot of people, I think, highlights for us how our thinking is just slightly glitched, because we think it's okay for some people to profit from it, but then the people whose land we're actually on can't. And that's something I wanted to just highlight and touch on. And hear your thoughts on.
Switched it off. That's really got me thinking, because even I'm wearing these stop Adani earrings. And yeah, I think I remember the treaty talks, not last year, the year before, as the Vic NAIDOC chair and committee, we said no to any kind of funding from the Treaty Commission. And at the time it was, that was our stance. It's like, we don't know what it looks like yet. It's not inclusive of all the clans of Victoria, so-called Victoria. So that was an easy no for us. But then, Queensland had a treaty talks and it was funded by Adani apparently. So everyone down here was going crazy, like, how could you sell out? So that actually has got me thinking about that. First of all, I don't get involved with mobs' business around other parts because it's not my business. For me, if we want to flick some images or if we're running out of time, there's some just images of Southeast Australia, just some things that have happened in the last couple of years. It's been happening for a long time. But for me, the over-extraction of resources in terms of clearfell logging and water irrigation, which, was the Darling River has dried up. The kids in Wilcannia don't even know what it's like to have a river, which is Uncle Badger Bates, who's a Barkindji elder. He says that, without the Barker, he might as well be dead, which is horrible. But that country's life, as I said, with the kids even and with us, and we're decolonising, so I'm learning more and more, even with this pandemic and being disconnected from the environment. Well, not me, because I live up in the bush. I made sure I live there. But yeah, it's all connected. It's not separate. And it's got me thinking, because even with logging, logging isn't, the government subsidise Vic forests for the logging up there, and there's been a law passed, not a law, but a bill, something's passed recently, to legalise steep slope logging, which was illegal up until a couple of days ago, last week. So it's now affecting our water catchment in the Thompson Dam, and basically that's Melbourne's drinking water. So, and I teach the kids, we need to celebrate our drinking water. We've got some of the cleanest drinking water in the world. And I think about, I've got friends in Africa that are living in, conditions where the kids are catching malaria, and, it's just, there's so much that it gets me. I've got to bring it all together next year during my studies. But when it comes to royalties, I agree. I guess for me, for so long, it's a process. You've got to come to terms with the fact that, we can't stop it. If it's going to go ahead, maybe we need to be...
Totally, and obviously there's certain... no, I don't want to interrupt. Go. You had something to say.
But even to add on to that, sis, the other point I was going to say is a rollback of federal legislation that doesn't empower us to protect our land, a native title reform that... native title, it's crazy. It's the government saying, we stole your land, but prove how we stole it. Prove how you're connected to that land. We've taken you, we've moved you to this mission, we've moved you to this mission. Now, you sit here and tell us how you're connected to that land. It's insanity. But if there was reform in terms of legislation federally that empowers us to say no to these kinds of things, at the moment, it's not, it feels like with Aboriginal communities, it's like mining, sports, art. They're your three things. Go out and do it. Go out, get out there. Oh, we'll support it. We'll back you 100%. But when it's saying, okay, what about renewable energy? What about just stopping it altogether? What are you doing? Like, just look at what happened, the shambles that just happened over in over at COP. It's insanity. So, I think, in terms of we can't change what's here at the moment, so maybe if there's a way of, but even then, like I'm saying that, and in an ideal world, if a mining company said, you could put this many million into language preservation, but I bet you there would be some kind of backhanded way of, controlling it and not giving sovereign Aboriginal people sovereign rights over how they use that. So in a way, it's a lose-lose, I suppose. So it's just, it's interesting, but
Yeah, and that, I guess that touches
needs to
on
happen.
that phrase I threw in the opening of like climate change and an outcome of racism. What I mean is not that the person who says go back to where you came from, not that kind of racism, but the racism that established that the construct of race that supposed that white culture was superior and then other cultures were inferior to that. And Western European scientists and philosophers and politicians from the 1600s and 1700s literally said that, you know, white culture is superior, and then there's the yellow race, and then there's the red race, which they referred to First Nations people, and then there's the black race, and that's something we are still kind of like recovering from. And that is what allowed this relationship that we now have with our earth to become so commonplace. It's like, yeah, we rip stuff out of the earth, we manufacture it and pollute the waterways in the process, and then we make you stuff that you use for 6 months, and that toaster ends up in the tip. That's normal. So that's a cultural perspective. That's like, we've got to, when we talk about, oh yeah, what's your cultural perspective? What's your cultural perspective? Oftentimes we overlook the white cultural perspective, the European cultural perspective that normalizes these types of things. And I think that's what I'm really pointing towards when I say racism caused climate change, is that our relationship with our environment was informed by Western colonial kind of like thinking and actions that's now gone from logging to destroying waterways and literally tipping the balance of our planet. And I think that's why anti-racism work and climate work and economic justice work and First Nation sovereignty are so closely interconnected. You can't really do one without the other. So yeah, it's not that we're supposing that a solution is mining sovereignties, but it's like if that idea that certain groups of people can profit from it and certain others can't, that's something that's really bugging me. Anyways, there was other points you wanted to raise, so I don't want to take up too much more time because I want to hear we've got about 15 minutes to go, so if you wanted to throw to your video, Stacey, or your slides, you can do that. Otherwise, for the audience today with us here online, when we're talking about centering First Nations, obviously not everyone here works in these kinds of spaces. They're working in climate spaces, gender spaces, economic justice spaces, refugee, migrant settlement spaces. What would centering First Nations sovereignty, not just decolonization, but First Nations sovereignty, what would that look like for some other people working in various spaces in sectors that we have present?
I've got something really quick. I think just quickly, sis, and I'll go like this, but we're in Victoria, so I get a handball at, hey, that's right. I think funding languages, in terms of not just throwing some funding at Indigenous languages, but actually making sure that that money hits the ground. I remember doing a talk for the 30th anniversary of Aboriginal organisations in Queensland, and I was the MC, and the head of Indigenous Community Health got up and he said, I want to thank the Shadow Minister for Health for the so many millions of dollars that went into our community. Everybody was clapping. He said, I want to break that down for you, what that looks like on the ground. And he went through level by level where the money goes, and 0.8% of that money gets to Aboriginal communities. And the rest goes into non-Indigenous, gets stuck in the system that's designed for this purpose, to make it look like it's big and shiny and that we have some say and that we're valued, but in fact we're not, So I think, in terms of, I forget where I was even going with it. But you can see, I mean, it's
sort of clear for me as in the sense that, I guess thinking about really how the outcomes and how it impacts community. I mean, that's a perfect example of even the story with the child in care. $30 million a year goes into out-of-home care services, and it's, culture's not reaching the kids. So there's the cogs and the oil in the machine that needs to be taken care of first. I think about Pay the Rent, which is an initiative that has started here in Victoria, and it's amazing. There's families and, talk about people power. Setting up the branch in Carlton, I'll be doing a couple of hours out there each week. Obviously Lydia Thorpe's, partnered with, not partnered, ACF, Australian Conservation Foundation, donated a building, and it's all getting set up at the moment. So that's really empowering to know that we get to sit together next week and come up with ideas and campaigns. We're getting up in the bush to, do some direct action against the loggers, or against Vic Forests, not the loggers. It's not, they're just doing their job. But yeah, so there's lots of exciting stuff coming through there, and we don't have to answer to anyone except for the committee that oversee the funds that come in through Pay the Rent, and that's all mob. So yeah, that's a really good start. So anyone who wants to donate, we've got friends, and I've got beautiful Jewish friends and families who their families donate to pay the rent just on an ongoing basis. Businesses who are profiting off stolen land, you know, send a percentage of your profits to pay the rent. It pays for funerals. We support deaths in custody. We're setting up an offshoot for caring for country and connecting kids and community to country. So that's the space to look at here in Victoria for the moment.
Thank you, Stacey. Did you want to refer to any of the slides of the video that you had prepared earlier, or do you want to?
It depends if you want to. I just had them there because for me, I can't. My mum always taught me, and my aunties and uncles, we don't go anywhere without telling our truth, you know. And so I always bring pictures with me. I'm a curator of art exhibitions, but really curating for me just sounds so weird. I'm a facilitator of our mob stories, so we bring our stories together. It's truth telling, you know. And so the images that I had Josh put together, I sent them through last night. It's just a snapshot of what's happening here in the southeast, just a snapshot. And I want to remind everybody so that we don't forget, because obviously COVID, we're in, you know, a very serious time, but this is still happening and it's only going to get worse. This is the Barker, which is dried up just over the border of so-called Victoria. So you can move through quickly and I'll just sort of commentate. So there's the mass fish kill that happened not last year, the year before, and that was a result of the toxic algae that came through because of the water mismanagement, water irrigation to the cotton farmers. But we have our almond farms here now, kilometres upon kilometres of almond farms along the rivers. If you look at the map, you can see them all dotted along the rivers up there, and they actually need more water than the cotton farms. So what's going to happen in another few years? I'm pretty worried. So this is not a healthy river, obviously. That's just a very sad picture. And then the next picture, Uncle Larry, he's a Tanarong elder. We went up to the logging coops, so we go up. I get my Ranger Stacey boots on. We get up, we go up bush and we check in on the coops. But yeah, that's my niece, so that's a bit of a, you know, elder looking on, but now that's my niece who's 3 years old walking through. She's covered in coal, ash from the post-logging industrial fire. So there's the scars of country. That's our beautiful mountain country that's being, you know, 5 football fields a day is being logged. So the next picture, that's the Jitty Jitties, that's us dancing in a coop. That's a big post-logging incineration, basically. So they're, you know, during a pandemic as well, they're still doing it, and it's a respiratory disease, and this is the air that people are breathing in up there. But also it's creating more wildfires because it's becoming a monoculture up there. We need to have a big mix of different flora and fauna, but, you know, the Gippsland bushfires that happened early last year wiped out billions of animals and insects and country. So, yeah, just smashing you guys with it, sorry. That's us. We went up and gathered to check out the coops. We did visit Healthy Country as well. We sang. The birds started tweeting and the wind kicked up. Country remembers when we sing and when we play our clapsticks as well. Bare feet, leeches, you know, all of it. And the girls, the young ones, had to get used to it. But yeah, we went up and we wrote a statement to Dan Andrews in 2018, and it's still unanswered. It's been 2 years now. So that's just me contemplating a very, very old fern. That one, actually, I put that in there because that was a marked coop. So it'd be looking like those other, the destruction not long after that photo was taken. That's a coal mine in Gippsland. Mariki would have been here today on the panel. This is her country. I know mining needs to happen, but I always think about what I'm purchasing and what machines I'm contributing to, the money that I earn. I'm trying to lower my footprint so I'm not contributing to this. That's Lydia's country, that's Mariki's country, that's seriously generations upon, it's just irreversible. Then I always like to talk about Tasmania because they're part of the southeast and, the kelp forest, which is under the ocean. We don't see it. It used to be thriving and it's now 95% gone. So there's a small amount that clings to King Island down there. And I think that's, and then the future again, I always remind myself who I'm doing this for. And yeah, there was NAIDOC. I spoke about NAIDOC and advocating about country. So I use all the platforms. We use it through Jury, through NAIDOC, through my full-time job, through everything. I'm calling it out in meetings. That's what we all need to be doing. And then just to finish off with a photo I took a couple of weeks ago of a healthy river and what they should look like. Big old mountain ash, the tallest flowering gum trees on the planet, and they store a lot of carbon and they're being cut down. And then, Tasmania, Newkind. Just wanted to finish with some nice images, so it wasn't...
Thank you, Stacey, and thank you, Fred, as well. Can you please give both of our panelists a round of applause? You got it. There really is a lot to talk about. We could have gone on for hours because there's 200 years of colonization, 80,000 years of history of culture that we've got to discuss and help preserve. And I wish we'd had a bit more time to talk a bit more about your language program as well. Do you want to mention that briefly so people can be aware, because you mentioned the funding stuff as well? So.
Yeah. So our funding sort of wraps up in June next year. But this program's been around for around 12, 13 years, working with endangered Aboriginal languages around the country. Wunungu Awara it's called, over at Monash University, and working with communities closely, recording songs and narratives in language, and just recently starting to record stories that aren't in language, because we're contemporary Aboriginal people, around the country. When those stories are still there, so why not value them in whatever format they're in, which in some cases in English, and taking the literal meaning of those stories and then animating it in 3D animation, and then the animations stay with the community. They own the intellectual property rights, they own the copyright to it, and they can do whatever they like with it. We will put, if the community allows us to, we'll put a non-downloadable link on our website, and so people can see and hear about the story of that community and that animation. But and it's really important work, and coming back to what I was just talking about earlier in terms of there needs to be funding around language. Language equals culture in many ways. And like Sister was saying, when you go on the country and you pull out those clapsticks and you start singing in your language, any of you can go with any of our mob anywhere around the country and you'll experience it firsthand. We'll be singing about a bird, that bird will come. We'll be singing, the wind will kick up. What's here, what we walk around on, the concrete, these buildings, these clothes, these shoes, that's one little grain of sand on a beach. The rest of it is what we have in our essence, core being, and that's what connects us to this country. They're the thousands of generations underneath that concrete that's there. And what we have in so-called Australia for the last 200 and whatever odd years is just one drop of sand on a beach, and the rest of it is what we have and the knowledge that we hold, and that needs to be acknowledged by government and by the wider community, by the general society, because going forward, people are slowly starting to realise it. Government needs to catch up. Indigenous people around the world, we didn't choose, right? We weren't not technologically advanced. We chose the path that we knew was the best for this planet, and we made that conscious decision. We came in contact with many people over thousands and thousands of years, and we decided not to adopt those things for a purpose, because what we had sustained us in paradise. And that's with a lot of Indigenous people around the world. So the more our voices are heard, I feel like the more we can roll back a lot of the stuff that's happening because of industrialisation.
Thank you so much. Perfect note to end it on. Please, another round of applause for both our panelists. Thank you so much.